Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Scrubbed In Show. I hope you've all been keeping well. This week, I'm afraid it's just me, but we do have with us a lovely guest. We have with us Dr. Tim Ringrose, who is the co founder and CEO of Cognitant, an award winning patient engagement platform. And prior to that, he served as the CEO of Doctors.net up into acquisition, where then he also worked as part of the M3 group. And some of you may also know his backstory, and the kicker in all of this is he was so close to being a renal consultant, but left the profession to pursue all of these wonderful adventures. And he's also on the RSM Council for Digital Health. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Abdul. Nice to be here.
So there's a lot to talk about, but let's take it back to kind of the early days. Tell us kind of, this passion to pursue medicine, or for lots of people, they wanted to be something other than a doctor. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, in fact, I trained in the days when if you were a medical student, you were 99% sure you were going to continue as a doctor. There's none of this. Oh, I'm going to have a portfolio career. I'm going to become a health tech person. And so things have changed such a lot now. So it was really heresy at that point to think about doing anything different. The kind of the feeling was, if you've chosen medicine, you're going to see it through. You're going to have a career in this. You're going to do your DPhil or PhD. You're going to do your specialty training. You're going to get your CCST, as it was then. Or become a GP, and that was the path that everybody else had trod, and you were going to follow, and you weren't going to make any complaints about the hours because everyone has to do that and get through it.
No.
So that I trained, and I really enjoyed clinical medicine. I was thrilled to be doing medicine. I found it, a real honor, really, to be trusted by people to advise them on their health and to be, uh, prescribing drugs, doing procedures, all that kind of stuff. And renal medicine is quite complex, and I guess that was the attraction. It's a interesting condition that causes quite devastating effects, and if you can manage those conditions, then you can have a profound effect on people's health. So it was all quite different scenario then. One other thing that was different actually was that when I was getting to the end of my specialty training, there was real competition to get consultant jobs. It wasn't guaranteed.
Mm.
So there were a lot of people in some specialties, particularly things like obstetrics and gynecology, where they were really worried that they only had a 1 in 4 or less chance of getting a consultant job. And, people were thinking, am I going to have to change and train as a cardiologist or, chest physician or something else because I can't get a job in the field that I want to go for? So it's funny how things have changed such a lot now.
No, definitely. And since you brought the topic up, I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts on medical students who get through med school and jump straight into like a startup or kind of a consultancy firm and don't really do a single day in kind of hospital medicine? Keen to hear what advice you give or what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, I suppose that, as I said, things have changed such a lot that my natural inclination is to say it's a shame not to do some clinical medicine. If you've gone through med school, it's a shame not to practice for a little bit. But at the same time, I think, I realize that things have changed such a lot that you can't apply those old rules anymore. And it's still a really good degree to have. And, I think if you've done medical training, it puts you in a very strong position to understand the science and the biology, but also to understand the clinical sort of environment. So if you want to go and do something, invent something, bring something new to market, then why not? But that is a real culture shift. And I think that it's become much more accepted these days that if your motivation is to have an impact on healthcare, then maybe not doing clinical medicine is the better way to do it.
Mm. I, I do get that, and I agree with that to a certain extent. And it brings me back to your own personal journey. You are so close to becoming a renal physician consultant. Tell us why you kind of pulled the plug, as they say, to completing your training, becoming a consultant. What was going through your head at that time?
Yeah, there's quite a few things going through my head. Exasperation for sure.
Mm.
And, as I said, I was on that kind of conveyor belt of, I want to become a consultant as soon as possible and all that sort of stuff and get a job in a great teaching hospital. But I suppose a lot of things happen at the same time. Started having a family, and you start to realize that it's not fair on your family if you're, dedicating everything, all your energy to your career, and you've got to think about what are the priorities in life. But I also had the opportunity to jump ship, as you put it, because my friend Neil Bacon had started a digital health company, which was really unusual in those days. He started it in 1998, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
And I just thought, well, to use the phrase all my kids use, you only live once. If you've got a chance to join and do something different for a couple of years, and then you can always go back, let's do it. I actually did give up my training number, so I got a letter from the dean saying he was very surprised. And why was I doing this? But it felt to me like, there's not a lot to lose, and maybe I can't get back on the renal training program, but I can find another job. So let's go for it.
No, definitely. And I can imagine at the time, people must have just been looking at it thinking, my God, he's probably making the biggest mistake in his career. Tell us a bit more about kind of Neil Bacon, and obviously it was doctors.net, which you're referring to. Did you kind of transition from clinician one day, CEO the next day, or kind of what stage were you at the startup when you joined?
Yeah, well, I joined and I was the medical director, and so it was a very different job, because you go from constantly being bleeped all the time and being pulled in different directions to suddenly having no bleep, to going into an office and you decide what the priorities are, which took a little bit of getting used to. Also, you still do work at the weekends, but you're doing work at your own,
leisure.
At your own leisure, and what you think is important. And so I was involved in really working out what's the value that we can build on to provide a service that's going to be really popular with doctors, because the proposition is, as you know, is that it's basically a free website, a free email address for life, and a website that's also free that provides a forum and CME and stuff like that. But in those early days, we were adding those layers on. And so I was doing quite a lot of work with the CME program, building educational modules. And I was also doing quite a interaction with the Department of Health, as it was then, because we actually delivered some training programs for the Department of Health.
Oh, wow.
And that was really interesting.
Late 90s, early 2000s, how was the response to the kind of the health community to tech at that time? Like, everyone, has an email address now, but how was it then? Were you finding it difficult to get those early adopters? Did they see the need and value for it?
Neil is a visionary, and his vision was amazing and far-sighted, and I found it was very, very rare that you met a doctor who didn't see the value in being a member of Doctor.net UK, getting that free email address, being able to look at the forum even if you weren't going to post. And I always say that doctors are quite keen adopters of technology in general, but we also like to express an opinion. So if there's an opportunity to go online and have a chat with somebody and give your opinion, I think a lot of doctors are up for that. So I don't think there was any difficulty in people understanding the value. And it was free. Now that caused its own problems, because we then had to work out, well, what's the commercial basis of this? I can go back onto that in a minute. But another thing that really helped us was that we developed partnerships with the Medical Protection Society, and we had a kind of partnership with the General Medical Council, which really helped us with our marketing. And we also worked with medical schools, because our philosophy was, well, it's going to be easier to get medics to join up as students than it is when they're busy.
True.
So let's get them young.
No, that's what we're trying to do with Peer right now. Tell us kind of that journey, as the startup grew, as it became established, to getting millions of doctors. How did you change as an individual, and kind of the advice of being a leader, being a CEO? Because I know a lot of clinicians are now making that leap into kind of these exec roles.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had quite a journey. I didn't do an MBA, but what happened is, after I joined Doctors.net UK, it was during the first .com bubble, early 2000s, and the corporate finance advisors for the company basically said to Neil and the board, well, the value of this company will be, demonstrably greater if you can show that this works in other countries.
Mm.
And I had actually just come back from a 6-month spell working in intensive care in Adelaide, in Australia. So I was like, oh, I'll do it. How about Australia?
Yeah.
And so I always think of it like I did a mini MBA, a practical MBA, because I got a budget. I went off to Australia. My family came with me, and we set up an office in Sydney, and it was an amazing experience. So, I got to experience how to build a company from scratch within another company. We hired people, we created a clone of the website, and made it. It was called AusDoctors.net, and I build relationships with the medical colleges in Australia, went around the hospitals. So I learned a lot. And so I went from being a clinician who really didn't have any commercial experience to being somebody who had the opportunity to build a business, and experience what it's like. And I guess one of the big learning exercises for a clinician moving into tech is marketing, because it's
Yeah.
something you don't think about as a clinician, is it? But it's part of life, and you've got to think
Super
about
important.
the 4 Ps, and what's your product, what's the positioning, how do you promote it, all that kind of stuff. And that's so I found that my attitude when I moved from my NHS job was, I'll stay here as long as I'm learning and as long as I'm enjoying it. And I found
Nice.
it was a terrific learning experience. As I say, I didn't do an MBA, but I felt like I had a practical MBA that I did.
You did real world experience, which trumps an MBA. I've never done an MBA, but I remember in our previous conversations we kind of talked about the commercial model and you guys figuring out how to commercialize it and turn it into a sustainable business. The question I want to ask is: a lot of founders stay at it for a while, right? They're trying to figure out the models. They're trying to figure out, how do I commercialize this? How do I make it sustainable? At what point, and you've got a second business now, when do you give up? Do you ever give up? It's the guy who just hitting the rock until he gets the diamond. And how did you discover how to make money? In that mess of question. So when do you give up? And what's a good way of figuring out, okay, I've got this platform. How do I kind of start generating revenue?
Well, I think you have to be a bit of an optimist.
Mm.
And so I think if you're a founder, if you're going to do something, then by nature you've self-selected yourself as a glass half full optimist person who's
Yeah.
never going to give up. Persistence is really, an underrated skill. We tend to judge people by their LinkedIn profiles and all that sort of stuff these days, but actually the people who really make real change are the ones who are just doggedly pursuing something and just not giving up. But to your point, there are times when you have to be real. You have to realize that maybe things aren't going in the right direction, and you need to think again. And I've advised quite a few businesses over the years, and some of them haven't succeeded, and some of them have had to admit they haven't got it right. Others have gone down a path, seen that it's not working, sort of retrace your steps a bit, get back on track, pivot, to use that overused word, and work out a new model. And that is challenging, particularly when you've given investors a very optimistic hockey stick shaped financial
Yeah.
projections, and you're way off it, and you're thinking, we need to raise more money and we need to rethink our whole business plan because it's not working. But to come back to Doctors.net UK, we were in a good position in many ways, in that we had this huge membership of doctors. They weren't just signing up; they were using it. We were getting, even in the early days, we were having tens of thousands of doctors using it on a daily basis. And our challenge was, how do you monetize that? And we kind of knew that doctors are pretty stingy, so charging a subscription fee could probably work, but it was going to be a bit of a struggle. And we initially got sponsorship, but we had organizations who were paying us quite reasonable monthly sponsorship. But the trouble about sponsorship is that it's very hard to demonstrate return on investment, and so inevitably what happens is, after a few months, you might have a very strong advocate in that organization who really believes in it and says, well, yeah, we're going to support this, but it's hard for them to demonstrate to their board that this is money well spent. So it's not very sustainable. And what we found was that it was hard work keeping these people on board, and it was hard to grow it. So we had to think again. And Neil had much said in the early days of setting up the network that we weren't going to work with pharma. And at the time, doctors absolutely loved it. We're going, yay, let's keep it pharma free. We don't want pharma here.
Yeah.
No adverts. And we kind of had to do a little bit of a volte face and say, okay, well, you guys, we reckon we probably need to work with pharma. But the way that we did it, I thought was quite funny. We decided to do a poll of the members and say, well, so this is a community, so which would you rather? Would you like to pay a subscription fee, or would you like to keep it free? And if we keep it free, we're going to have to work with pharma.
Cheeky.
Surprise to surprise, a lot of people said they would pay, but the majority, quite a strong majority, said,
of course,
okay, well, let's keep it free. Yeah, pharma's all right. And what we said was, well, we will be careful about how we do this. So we're not going to just plaster the website with ads. But, pharma make products that are very useful. You use them, the valuable products. And what we will do is make sure that we're only showing you information that's relevant to you. So if you tell us, your specialty, we'll make sure that we only show you products that are relevant to you. And kind of that makes sense, doesn't it? Because,
of course,
if you're a cardiologist, you want to know about, the drugs and the data and other services that pharma can offer you for cardiology, but you don't particularly want to hear what services they have for something that's not of interest to you. And so we introduced that, and it took a little while to get going, but it was very successful. We did two main things. We sent doctors market research invitations so that if a pharma company wanted to research a particular area, then we would invite members to complete a survey, usually online. And we did that with a market research company. So we did what's called field work for them. But then we realized that we were only getting a small piece of the pie and we wanted the whole pie. So then we set up a market research company inside and did that. And that's a very useful service. And as I said before, doctors like giving their opinion. So
it works well.
It works well, and we paid them not a huge amount of money, but we paid them honorarium. We had a system called ESR points, not erythrocyte sedimentation rate, but electronic surf reward points, I think we called them.
Oh, nice, yeah.
And then you could cash them in for Amazon vouchers or whatever. But then the other thing we did was sent what we call bulletins, so that every week we'd send members a bulletin, and this would have information from pharma and from other companies, including the GMC actually, with information that was relevant to them. And people were really good about it, and they were kind of read it and clicked at it, so we got good engagement levels. And so we charge companies for that. So it was basically charging for access to doctors' attention for research, or to promote something to them, or bring to their attention something.
And you clearly done well off the back of that, because you were acquired by a larger company. Tell us a bit more about the acquisition process. How did it change for you? What it's like, and any advice? Because I know sometimes acquisitions can get a bit messy, can get a bit difficult. How was it for you, and any advice for other founders and CEOs?
Yeah, well, I suppose the bit I hadn't done my MBA was around mergers and acquisitions and selling a company. So it was totally new. We'd actually been going for quite a while. So the company was 10 years old when it was sold. So it hadn't been a kind of, rapid knock it together and, sell it quick. But we had a good revenue. We were profitable. So we approached some corporate finance advisors. They were really good. They helped us put together our pitch deck and identify what companies would be interested. And they were, it's a bit like an eBay. They ran an auction basically for us.
Oh, nice.
So that people were asked to express an interest, to put in their indicative bids, and then there was a timetable. And of course, what you want, like any good eBay auction, is you've got 2 or 3 or more companies bidding. And we were in the fortunate situation where we had 3, but then 2 very strong companies bidding. So it then got down to which one is the best one. And we actually didn't go for the company that bid the highest amount. We actually went for the other company, because it's you've got to think about fit as well. And I guess the other thing you need to bear in mind is that someone might offer a high price. Again, it's a bit like eBay. Someone offers a high price and then they don't turn up to pick up the goods. During due diligence, they can knock you down and say, "Oh well, we offered this much," but
Yeah, we
a
don't think
bit
it's
like Elon Musk tried to do with Twitter.
yeah, basically. Um, and tell us about how things changed for you on a day-to-day basis after you kind of the acquisition process went through. What was your new role? What were you doing? And a lot of the time, there's a culture shift when you listen to kind of these stories. They go into this new corporate or this conglomerate, and things change drastically. So how was that for you?
Yeah, well, I think everyone was slightly unsure about how it was going to change.
Hmm.
I was actually planning to leave. I
Okay.
kind of thought I've done this for 10 years. It's time to do something else. But I was persuaded to stay by the company that bought us. I reported to the CEO, and he was based in the US, and uh, they seemed like a company that had very similar mindset. They had actually started in Japan, building a
Yeah.
network of doctors. They'd been a lot better than us at monetizing it, so I kind of felt slightly jealous that
It
we'd
wasn't the other
started
way
a very,
around, right?
very similar idea. It was the wrong way around. We should be buying them. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. So I stayed, and I was glad I did. I became CEO of their European division.
Nice.
And that initially was just two UK companies because they acquired another market research company alongside us. But then over the next couple of years, we acquired some other companies, including companies in France and Germany, and another couple in the UK. And again, that was another learning experience because I had no experience of, being a corporate company buying other companies and how do you value them and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. So that was really good. But what I did find is that as you become big part of a much bigger corporation, the role does change. You have
Yeah.
much less to do with the kind of cold face of what service you're actually providing, and I kind of miss that. So I realized that my personality was much more suited to the early stage of a company, and
Okay.
I was
Interesting.
much more interested in building something and seeing what value you could develop.
No, interesting. So you spent kind of over a decade building this out, the acquisition, kind of managing bigger teams. What happened next? When does the idea of a Cognitant come around? Was it soon after? Did you take a break? Tell us a bit more about that part.
Yeah, well, I think I stayed for 5 years after the acquisition, so quite a period of time, and it was
Yeah.
a lot of that was great. Um, but I suppose I just had a gnawing feeling that I wasn't doing something that I really felt proud of anymore, and I really wanted to do something that I felt that was making a big contribution. I
Mm.
suppose the way to say it is that I thought someone else could do my job
Okay.
probably just as well, probably better than me, and
Mm.
I wasn't. It didn't feel like I was really using the skills and personality, and it wasn't quite the right fit for me. So I kind of had to push myself because it was quite comfortable. But I realized that if I stayed there for much longer, it would be really hard to leave. And that I had a few friends. Well, I've got friends who have stayed at the same company for many years, and they get to the point where they go, "Yeah, I'd like to start something else, but
It's a bit too late.
pension's good. It's
Yeah.
got stock options. I don't want to leave." So
Yeah.
I pushed myself off that I've got to do this, otherwise I'm not going to do it. And I actually knew vaguely what I wanted to do, but I found it really hard to crystallize that until I'd actually left. So
I
I
see.
suppose my advice to people listening is that if you've got that sort of burning feeling like you want to do something different, but you can't quite exactly work out quite what it is, then sometimes it comes to you when you need. Sometimes you just need to push yourself, and when you're out there on a limb and you've left your job, and that's when it comes to you.
Yeah. And it comes to you real quick, right? When you're
Yeah.
struggling. And did you know you wanted to do something in health? Because a lot of time founders, they go into a different industry sector altogether, or they kind of do something a bit similar. Because obviously, 15 years of experience, did you always know you want to stay in health?
Yeah, I did. I wouldn't rule out doing something outside health, but yeah, I did. I did really feel that something that I'd always been aware of as a clinician
Mm.
was something that I wanted to address, and that was that when you're seeing patients, doesn't matter what specialty and where you're working, you never have enough time to explain what's going on, and you know that they're leaving with lots of unanswered questions,
Yeah.
and they don't really know exactly what's going on. And with the internet, we know that everyone's going online. People are going online before they come to see you. They're going online afterwards. And unfortunately, what's happening, and we've become acutely aware of it during the pandemic, is that there's so much misinformation
Yeah.
that people are besieged with information from different sources that's all conflicting. They don't know what to believe, and our health service is struggling to deal with the basics of healthcare. So we need to develop ways to enable patients to understand more about what's going on and to be empowered to self-manage. We've got so many people with long-term conditions that we need people to understand how to manage their own health more effectively. So that was the area I wanted to get into.
And I agree. And I think more than we think, patients do proactively want to know more about their condition, their disease, how to manage it. And, as clinicians, we know as soon as we leave, the real questions are asked to the nurses, right? What did the doctor mean? How often do I take this
Yeah,
tablet? What
exactly.
am I waiting for, right? We know that the reality of it all. And I know those leaflets we used to hand out were awful. They still are awful, right? So tell us kind of the idea of crystallizing, kind of giving out these resources, allowing and educating kind of the community and society about the medical conditions. How did it all start? What were the first few days and weeks like? And I think a lot of our listeners want to know that, right? How do you get from 0 to 1?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I left, and I was thinking I'll just take a couple of months off and decide what I want to do. But I got going pretty much straight away because I was like, oh, I know what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I was really impressed with immersive technology and VR and AR. And in retrospect, I think I was a little bit too optimistic about it. But I thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if you can create VR experiences for people to understand about their health? They can go inside and understand the mode of action of drugs. They can understand how the heart valves work. They can understand
Yeah.
what heart failure means. They can understand all these things that are really hard to explain. And I still think that's a real opportunity. And so what happened for me was that I left. I was sort of putting this stuff together. I was thinking, I'm going to have to find someone who knows a bit about technology to work with me. And I was really fortunate in that two of the people I'd worked with
Yeah.
before in M3 wanted to come join me, and I got
Oh,
permission
nice.
from M3. So Daisy and Rick joined me, and so all of a sudden it was kind of okay. So there's three of us now. We've got to make this happen.
You've jumped
And
ship.
we experimented with Unity, and we built some scenes, and we were really lucky because we managed to get a client really early. We talked to a few of the people we knew in the industry, and it kind of surprised me. But when you've got nothing to show for it, but just a good idea, sometimes people will back you, and that's what happened. And so we built our first product. It was actually in the women's health area. Looking back, it's kind of embarrassing because it was pretty clunky, but it was the start of something, and from then we've moved on. We've actually found that the hardware for VR and AR is still not good enough
So
for
I was
mass
going to
usage.
say,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I would love to do more VR stuff and AR stuff, and we are doing bits and bobs. So we recently built a program for the NHS for patients about to have a day case surgery. It has the option of a VR game with an Oculus headset, or you can look at it on your phone. And it's a game. It basically gives you a little bit of an impression of what it's going to be like. So we've got some 3D models of the operating theatre and the waiting room and the ward afterwards, and a game so that you remember what to take and when to stop your drugs and when to stop drinking and eating. So we are doing bits like that, but actually we've simplified it a lot, and a lot of our programs are actually delivered as visual interactive programs, but not VR.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you found that to be the most effective in kind of videos, animations, interactive content? And what has the response been like from patients?
Yeah, we work very closely with patients because as clinicians we tend to think we know what the patient needs to know, but once you start talking to patients and people, really, you start finding out that their concerns are actually sometimes quite different from what you imagine they'll be. Often they're quite practical, and often they're not too worried about the science. They just want to know practical answers.
Yeah.
So it's very important to work with patients, and visual techniques are a really effective way to cut through literacy barriers and other sort of barriers for adoption. You can, if you produce something as an interactive animation, you can make something that a 5-year-old can understand. One of our first programs, I remember it was around heart failure, and one of the developers was staying with a family, and he came in one morning and said, "Look, I took a video," and he'd shown what he'd built as part of our prototype to one of the kids of the family he was staying with, and
Yeah.
it was really interesting because you could see this kid absolutely got it. You think heart failure
Oh,
is
wow.
actually quite a hard thing to
Exactly.
communicate, but that kid got it straight away. We're onto something. This is good.
No, it goes to show. And that brings me to the second part is a lot of the content, a lot of the resources you create is co-creation. So you're working with organizations, charities, hospitals, even kind of the pharma world. Why is that important than you guys going out and doing it? Because you are clinicians, you understand the disease, the pathology. Why is it important for co-creation?
Yeah, I think as I said, there's a tendency for clinicians to think they know the answer and that patients just need to know what we know, that kind of stuff.
Mm,
But actually, you find that's not always the case. But I think if you really want to have an impact on people's lives, you've got to really understand their perspective and not just deliver them dry information that perhaps answers the sort of medical school textbook answer to a problem, but actually gives them the answers to the questions that they have. And so by working with patients, you can really understand, people talk a lot about lived experience, and it's
yeah,
good that that's being recognized these days. But, if you've got a long-term condition, you're actually probably a lot more interested in hearing what another patient who's had that
exactly.
condition has to say about it than a clinician. I'm not saying you ignore the clinician because you still want that input, but I think it's really about creating programs that are having a holistic, that are looking at the science, looking at the the biopsychosocial model of disease, looking at all the different questions that people have, and trying to answer those in the right way.
Mm. One of so a lot of our listeners are building their own health tech, med tech companies, and some of the things they struggle with is working with a big hospital trust, getting kind of a pilot or commercial deal going, or working in unison with pharma. You've kind of done both. You've been doing it for many years. What advice do you have for these founders that are trying to secure a contract, trying to kind of build these industry relationships?
Yeah, well, the NHS is hard to sell to, and at the moment, I think a lot of integrated care systems are trying to cut down the number of pilots that are happening because
Mm,
there's a real Conrad from NIA talks about pilotitis that's going on in the NHS, and there's good and bad about it because it's good that in my experience, if you find a seniorish clinician who's enthusiastic and you've got a good idea,
mm,
they'll kind of go, yeah, let's try it here, let's do it. So that's nice, and you feel like you've made a lot of headway. But unfortunately, there are bad aspects to that because all over the NHS, there are loads of these little pilots going on all the time.
yeah,
And unfortunately, unless they've got a good sustainable model for funding, when they get to the end of the pilot phase, they're going to just get snuffed out.
yeah,
Um, I mean, I've been in that situation where you think, oh great, we've got some pilot money, we can get something done, we can prove it's going to be really valuable, and then they've got to fund it. Um,
yeah.
but it doesn't always work, and if there isn't money in the pot, then it can be something that's really really great, but it just doesn't
It's
go
not going to work.
forward.
Mm,
So I think you've got to be careful about where that money's coming from. If it's coming from one-off pots of money, we've got a bit of money left over, we can give it to this. You've got to be very wary and say, well, how are we going to find money for this for the following years?
exactly.
When it comes to pharma, um,
Because
you know,
everyone's
yeah,
dream is to work with pharma, right? So
well, it is
it's
in
not,
some ways. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, pharma has money, but these
yeah,
days, actually, pharma's starting to say, we don't have that much money, but compared to the NHS, they do.
yeah,
Um,
of course.
and working with pharma can be easier in some ways,
Mhm,
but unfortunately, they're big organizations. Some pharma companies like Bayer have great programs like Grant for Apps, where they are specifically looking for startups to work with. So that's a great
mhm,
one to look into. They'll even give you some non-dilutive funding to
mm,
help you on your way. So that's great. But if you're a service and you want to sell to the farmer, you need to get on their procurement framework.
mhm,
And the procurement departments have got their elbows out. They don't want anyone else coming in. And a lot of pharma companies are actively trying to reduce the number of suppliers they work with. So you've really got to demonstrate you've got something that no one else can provide
mm. No,
that's
that's
valuable.
interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that was good insights. The question then is, a lot of the WhatsApp groups I'm in, every so often there's messages saying, "Oh, my investors are pushing me to leave the UK market, go to America, go to Middle East. There's no money in the NHS. We might pull the plug. We're going to struggle with fundraising." What are your thoughts, your concerns, perhaps in the future of kind of innovation and talent in the UK, the red tape around NHS? Do you see that becoming a problem, or do you think, do you know what, it's already saturated? Every random Joe has their own app for something or another, right? Keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really give a strong answer about working outside the UK because, my experience has mainly been in the UK.
Mm,
I mean, personally, I feel very motivated to improve healthcare in the UK.
mm,
So I think it's a shame if you've got a great health solution and you can't make it work in the UK. I think that's a tragedy. It doesn't mean
yeah,
you've done something wrong. It's just a tragedy in that you've got something to offer and the healthcare system can't engage you. I do believe, and maybe this is coming back to my optimism, that the formation of the ICSs, although there are lots of problems and there's not much money around, they are
mm,
looking for solutions. If you look
yeah,
at the adoption of virtual wards and solutions like triage, the NHS is willing to adopt solutions if it meets a need. So if you can really cling on to those and provide a demonstrable value to meet one of the objectives, then that's good. Saying that, you're right. There are a lot of companies who will probably do a little bit of development in the UK and then decide, yeah, let's go to the US. Let's see if we can get more traction there. And I think if you got that, really does make sense for a lot of services. Obviously, it's a much bigger market.
mm,
It's much more of a marketplace, so haven't got the restrictions. But I think personally, I think if you've got a great solution, why not help the NHS?
of course. Yeah. The question we like to ask our guests is, have you found a particular company you're impressed by, some of their solutions, the digital health that's come to light, that you think, wait a minute, this is going to change things. I really like this. And the other question is, how do you keep on top of it all? There is so much happening in the space, AI, ChatGPT. I've seen this little new pin that's come out. How do you stay on top of all the amazing things that are happening in the space, and stay informed? So those are the two questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's the linked up there. There's so much going on. I don't feel like I'm keeping up with it.
Yeah,
And uh, I think that AI is the new wave, isn't it? But I sense actually that there's a little bit of a skepticism creeping in about AI.
yeah, me
And
too.
I think people are realizing that, okay, yeah, it has a lot of value, but it's not the answer to everything.
Mm,
And there's still a role for humans in life. Um,
yeah,
but coming back to AI, a company that I'm impressed with is C2 AI. They're
yeah,
using, yeah, you know them. Yeah, they're using AI, using data and AI in a very clever way. I think the message for me is that AI can do some really fancy things. Generative AI in particular, but it's the back end where I think we can really make most use of it. And if we can release clinician time by using technology, so that they can spend more time with people and
yeah.
do the things that humans really need to do, then that's a real win-win.
Mm. You touched on a point about data, and I feel a lot of people don't really understand what data is or the value of having data, and it's all kind of gimmick and fluff, especially clinicians, right, who are kind of discovering the world of digital health. How would you explain the importance and value of having data and kind of interoperability and being able to share data?
Yeah, well, again, that comes back to the what's the benefit of working and committing yourself to working in the NHS? And I think people say it, but actually it's absolutely true that the NHS is a unique environment with our nationalised
Mm,
healthcare system, and one of the benefits of that is that there is a lot of data that is available.
mm,
Unfortunately, it's very fragmented and in little silos. Um, it's interesting to look at the development of the federated data platforms. With all, I know there's a lot of controversy about it, but I do think we have an opportunity to be able to safely pool
mm,
data across systems so that you can start to answer questions and start to predict. And there's some fundamental questions in medicine that we're not very good at answering. Why do people with long-term conditions get certain exacerbations and not other exacerbations? What really are the benefits of this drug versus that drug?
Yeah.
So, I think if we can get access to large volumes of data, we can start to answer, basically using real world evidence,
Exactly.
some fairly basic questions that you just can't answer with clinical trials.
Conscious of time, the last question is advice for other budding entrepreneurs, budding health tech enthusiasts, particularly those that are on the fence. They don't know should they leave clinical medicine. They don't know if they should go out and start a company. Um, any advice for them, or kind of things that you've learned in your career up until now that you think might be helpful for someone listening to this now?
Well, I would never encourage someone to leave clinical medicine. I think it's something that you've got to decide for yourself, and if you can stick it, I think you should stick with it, because I think clinical medicine is such a valuable role that I would never encourage someone to leave it. I think the opportunities now for people who've got an interest to do something a little bit different and to have a role that's a bit of a portfolio and to do some clinical medicine and some med tech stuff or whatever is great. And there are so many schemes that will support you. There's the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Program. There's the Bite Med fellowships. There's lots of things that you can do, which is great. So I suppose my advice would be there's a lot of support you can get these days, and you don't have to throw yourself and jump in the deep end. You can join one of those schemes. One of the stated purposes of the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Scheme is to help people stay in the NHS. So you can do both. You don't have to make the choice that I made and jump from one straight to the other.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that reminds me, and it's probably because of individuals like yourselves who paved it for us and made it easier to kind of explore these avenues, explore these things. Even like Keith Grimes, when we had him, it was so difficult back then to kind of to understand, you're not really happy in medicine. What else is there? Not knowing where to do, how to go about it. And the learnings is just accelerated, right? It took a couple of years to figure out what you want to do, get to a place you like, and you can do that within weeks and months right now. So, yeah, thank you for paving the way for us in a way, to be fair, because, we're difficult otherwise, really.
That's very kind of you. And it's I'm so impressed with the people I meet these days. There's so much energy and intelligence. So I feel optimistic about the future of healthcare.
No, thank you. Thank you, Tim, for taking the time out. We wish you all the best with Cognitant and all your ventures and everything you're doing. And a massive thank you to our listeners. I'll leave the link to Tim's website, his LinkedIn, drop him a message if you want a bit more advice. But no, thank you once again.
Thanks, Abdul.